Welcome everyone to this video on settings for the Shamanic Astrology paradigm on the Solar Fire Gold astrology software and the most latest version, version 9. I'm going to be taking you through some of the different settings that the Shamanic Astrology paradigm uses for anybody who's been trained in Shamanic Astrology and typically uses it most of the time. It's really good to know what the settings in Solar Fire, especially if you use that software, are going to be for, giving readings, calculating transits, and so forth. There are other pieces of software such as time passages that are also going to be, I'm going to be doing a video on in the near future to help create what you need to know in as far as getting settings ready for calculating transits and so forth on the natal chart. All right, well, let's take a look at this and bring up Solar Fire. So for those that are interested in getting Solar Fire, know that this is obviously a video that can help introduce you and bring a simple to use guide to set up your software in Solar Fire for specifically Shamanic Astrology. So I won't be going into other kinds of astrology that would be obviously up to various other schools, but in this case, we're gonna go right into this. So the first thing that comes up when you bring up Solar Fire is generally you see a current transits right in here for whatever day this might be calculated as. Um, some of the more specific things that we want to bring up is first we want to go into preferences, and that's up at the top of the screen here under the top menu, preferences. And then the next submenu item opens up is edit settings, clicking on that. And then you get a box up here. And if you're looking at this from on a mobile device, a smaller device such as a phone, it may be a little more challenging to see the settings because the print is pretty small in the Solar Fire astrology software. So, but the first thing that pops up is Calculations tab, and the one thing you want to see on this is, or set this is, the little button for True Node. We calculate it from a true node perspective. These are the lunar nodes, of north and south nodes, and some astrologers use mean node, but in the Shamanic astrology paradigm, we use true node, and in my own practice, I use true node. The zodiac, you want to make sure that tropical zodiac is the one that's being used under default zodiac, and then the zodiac application, you want to make sure it's set for using as default zodiac for both new and open charts. So that way, whatever charts are open, it'll create the zodiac for that particular chart that's already open. The next item is houses, the tab for houses. These aren't in alphabetical order under default houses for tropical, but we want to set them at, we want to find the house system that is whole signs. So you will just scroll up and down this this field of options here, and look for whole signs, and that is the house system that we're going to use in the Shamanic astrology paradigm. And then down below, you can skip the sidereal unless you use sidereal. That's an entirely different type of zodiac that can be useful for other kinds of astrology systems such as Vedic. Under the house system application, we want to make sure we click on and make sure it's set for use this house system for both new and open charts. So you'll want to make sure that's set there. And points. You can arrange this point list. It's nothing that you need to really look at under this particular setting. We're going to go into displayed points and planets in a few minutes here. And the other thing to look at here, and to make sure that what comes up is selecting the current chart. When you select something, that it comes up for you. That is also important to have. And there is some options. These are preferences for yourself. Glyphs. There's 2 different glyphs for Uranus. There's 3 glyphs for Pluto. And if you use Eris, there's 2 glyphs, and then the sign of Capricorn, there is 2 glyphs as well. And these are the settings I have. I use the spaceship looking like glyph for Uranus. I use the cross with the, and above that a trident for Neptune. And then for Pluto, I use the little orb that's inside the sort of a cup with a cross below that. It almost looks like a little human being there. For Eris, I use a circle, small circle with a down arrow, and Capricorn is there's 2 different kind of goatfish-like combinations for the glyph. And the other things that we want to make sure is, it tells you what the dates are. This is all fine because it talks about the different calendars and what you need to use. But this is, I didn't need any changes to the settings there for that. And compliments, this is for your own benefit. If you're an astrologer, if you're learning to practice, or other, maybe working that into your own practice in different healing modalities, you can fill this in, and that'll print on the chart and or on the displayed screen for yourself, your name, your business name, your email, your website, your phone number. You can also hide this and it won't show, and then unhide it. So depending on what you're trying to do here. This is a video that can be used for anybody that's learned from Daniel Giammario, Kaylin Castell, and others that have practiced in shamanic astrology. Daniel, of course, being the originator of this paradigm. So then after that is done, let me see if there's anything yes, one thing in the eclipses. We always use the exact lunar phase, you can use maximum eclipse time. It's up to you, but I always have it at the exact lunar phase. Okay, so from there we've got those settings figured out. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to go into chart options, and we need to go into displayed points. This is going to be really useful in what is displayed on all the charts, including the nodes and the angles and the planets. So there's a default one that I've modified, and you can create your own. I've also done that for myself here. SHAMAST, just an abbreviation for Shamanic Astrology Points, and then PLAN and CH, which CH refers to Chiron, and PLAN refers to planet. So if we've got that highlighted, which is the first, the default one that comes up, you can, the next stage is to go into edit, and you click on edit. Now, some of this is by preference, but in shamanic astrology, we want to make sure the selected points are listed here. This would be, and I'm going to read them off for everyone: the moon, sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, and Vesta. Also both lunar nodes, the north node and the south node, and all 4 angles: ascendant, descendant, midheaven, and enum colae, which is otherwise known as the Holman roots. I also use Aries or Eris. Some prefer not to, some prefer to. That's an optional. The other ones that are optional are Juno and Ceres. I'm currently studying more about the asteroids and the dwarf planets, and so I'm looking at bringing those into the fold more and more as I determine what kind of value, what they mean in the system. But we do know, of course, Vesta has great meaning in shamanic astrology and in astrology in general. So making sure, so if you're looking to see how this is done, so if you wanted to say, oh, I don't want Ceres, so if you see it listed there, you click on it, and then it pops back into the unselected menu. But then we can put it back in here by just clicking on it, left clicking, Ceres, and it pops back into the selected points menu. And then you can go ahead and click save, and you save it, and voila. Or you can simply rename it or create a whole new one. So another way to do this is click on create. You can type in well, I can type in my name here as just the name of the file. And it's got the basic level information here for the selected points. It's drawing from what I previously had, so you can see all those points listed on the selected points, but you can customize it and name it something different. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel since that's not needed for me, but for you, you would click on save. And then once I've established that, I'll make sure that's selected there. Go ahead and click select, and what that does is it makes sure all the things on the displayed screen here, the current chart preview, shows up as it is. So I'm going to show you, this was recorded on March 19, 2020, right on the March equinox. Just before, as the sun is inching its way to that point where it crosses from the southern hemisphere to the northern hemisphere, and starts moving into spring in the north and fall in the south. All right, this is the displayed screen of the current transits at this moment. There's, as we can see, there's a current Mars and Jupiter conjunction, and they're closing in on Pluto. But that's, of course, changes day by day, hour by hour. And this is just showing you a larger graphic of what to make sure that you have on the screen for Shamanic Astrology Paradigm settings. I'll go ahead and click out of this. And the next point is to get into, once you've got all those settings, you can now cast natal charts. But what we're going to do is we're going to show you how transits work as far as their calculation from a shamanic astrology perspective. So again, we can do it one of a few ways, but this one I typically got used to doing. So I just bring up whatever natal chart is there, and I can click out and do a bi-wheel instead. So instead, I can click on this and look at my my own chart as an example of this, and bring up a bi-wheel. So I've got my chart. I click on the number 2 up here, just the icon, which is the bi-wheel chart. And I've got my chart, and I got the transit chart as the outer wheel. You can see here, inner wheel, my chart, outer wheel, the transit chart. So I click on that, and boom, I've got a bi-wheel happening here. And this, for me, as I go about this helps give me a visual what's going on with the current transits and how they relate to whatever chart I'm looking at. So in this case, I will go ahead and click on transits, which is a button on the right-hand side of the screen here. And there we go. We have another window that comes up, dynamic report selection. So in this setting, and I've got a default of aspect selection. Let's look at first off, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the target chart, which is my chart in this recording, is listed here. It's highlighted in that. So radix, this word here, radix is basically the target. Transits to radix, it's the target, whatever that you're trying to calculate, that's what we're trying to go off of. Various settings that you can choose. For most things, I choose stationary points, entering and leaving, which is an orb, a degree orb for what you're trying to calculate. But first, what I'd like to do is go into aspect selection. So in this box here, under aspect selection on the right-hand side of the smaller box, I go ahead and click on whatever that is. And for me, I saved it originally as S.A. Erik. And so that just prompts me to go, okay, that's Shamanic Astrology and the settings that I've saved as far as the aspect selection. So I click on that, and another window pops up, Transiting Aspect Set. And it's got it highlighted here. I've done several different ones when I've helped others over Zoom and in person set their Solar Fire astrology software up, Solar Fire Gold version 9, up and on their own computer. So go ahead and go into Edit, and I'm going to show you how this works. So S.A. Erik is the aspect selection of this is what you might say the target planets that are going to be shown when you're doing transit. So it's not the one that you're the transiting planet, but the one that's the target planets or points on the chart. So I go ahead and click edit. And the orb or the aspects themselves, this is where the targeting planets are looked at here. So in shamanic astrology, the basic aspects that we measure, the ones that create the most movement in a person's life or motivation, a push in a person's life, are what traditional astrology calls hard aspects, or Western astrology, and in shamanic astrology we call them dynamic aspects, because they're the ones that with the sort of the most current to push a person to create change in their life, to help create opportunities for themselves in what they truly want to become in this lifetime. So conjunction, opposition, and square, you can see all of those are selected, and it's got a plus, that means they're selected, opposition, and square. And as you can see, I've got them, all three of these, set in the same, all the same degrees in the orbs, both applying and separating, applying and separating. So if you've seen this screen for the first time and you want to make sure that you've got, for example, I just unclicked conjunction, I double clicked it, and then I'm double clicking it again to bring it up again. So the natal, you want to make sure that the natal orbs is the amount of degrees for a planet. This is just a natal planet. This isn't the transit part, but this is the natal planet. That a hard aspect, we have a default measurement of 10 degrees for both applying and separating. So you want to have that set up all around. And then progressions, we have 1 degree. And you just have to type in the number 1. You don't have to actually put 00 in there. It'll automatically fill in. Once you hit tab, it'll fill in. And the same thing with the transits. If you hit 1, it'll just fill in by itself like that. So you can just tab across with 1 tab, 1 tab, 1 tab. And you can do that for conjunction, opposition, and square. But if you're using trines, if you're using sextiles, which can be useful in other applications as well, you can bring those into the fold if you're trying to work with something more specific. And so we use a smaller orbs for that in that. But just on the base, these are just basic settings. We have it as this. The description of my file name, SA Erik, is I just listed under standard aspect set, because that's the standard aspects that I use. But again, I can modify that as I go along with, if I'm trying to do research or, go into deeper transits, I can look at different things and combinations. So with all of that set, as you can see, the glyphs come up, because if you hit conjunction, you can see that. But then there's sometimes different lines that are shown on the displayed chart. I just have typically just a solid line listed there. So I go ahead and save this as it is and select it. I've got 2 other ones that are basically the same listed there, and then a shamanic astrology ASP, meaning aspect, listed there. You could do other kinds of aspects if you're just trying to find conjunctions or oppositions. I've got a whole bunch of different like orbs, like a 2-degree orb, a 3-degree orb for conjunctions. If I'm trying to narrow down something, when I'm trying to figure out certain aspects on a chart, doing research. But if you just want to calculate conjunctions and oppositions, you can do it that way. Or if you want to use, like, when a planet is first becoming visible, you can use a 10 or 15-degree orb depending on which planet you're using. If you're just looking at different types of orbs, you can use any other kind. If you're there's a Vedic aspect that I don't use, for example, but for everybody, this is a Shamanic Astrology Paradigm creation for solar fire settings video. You just want to connect onto that right now at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel that. but for you, you'd want to select it because you've modified it. And to calculate transits, to make sure that you don't have reams and reams of pages, if you're just trying to narrow down something, then you'd want to choose in the point selection here, you know, if you're saying, oh, what are my Neptune transits, or what is this person's Neptune transits? So you can click on this, and you know, maybe I want to just figure out what the Chiron transits are all going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. But before I do that, we can go into edit, and just to make sure that the only selected point in there is Chiron. You don't need any other transiting points unless you're, you know, wanting to look at the relationship with Chiron and Uranus, or Chiron and Saturn, or some other celestial body. But for right now, these are my selected points, just Chiron. Go ahead and click on that. And then we do an event selection. We go into the event selection and we say, well, okay, what is it that we need to look at? Okay, transits to radix. That's something I mentioned earlier. The radix is whatever chart you're targeting. You can choose or not choose sign ingress for Chiron. It's important only in the fact that you may want to know like when it moves into a particular sign. You know, the longer term planets, you know, it varies how long they spend in a particular sign. For the inner planets, it's important to know when they're, much more important to know when they're coming into the sign, because of the, you know, what you want to calculate and how long it spends in there, if you're doing more minor aspects in that space. But the longer term planets, it's optional. For Jupiter, it's really vital. But if you're looking at like future research and you're wanting to do like mundane astrology, yeah, looking at the sign ingress is really important. So stationary points, that's when a planet stations retrograde and or stations direct. You can look at like in combinations with solar and lunar eclipses, and Solar Fire will give you that information. But for right now, we'll leave that out. And some people use void of course moon. I don't particularly use it very often, so I leave that blank. And then entering, leaving. This is the orb. And I mentioned before, we calculated the 1 degree orb for conjunctions, squares, and oppositions. So you typically use entering and leaving, so I know when it gets into that 1 degree orb, and it helps me calculate cycles completely. There's some, of course, intuitive and other things that you bring into the fold when you're looking at cycles, and depending on the kinds of astrology that you practice. But 1 degree orb is the sort of the rule of thumb, but there are definitely exceptions, depending on, like, for example, Saturn and Jupiter. There are exceptions to those depending on, because sometimes there's only one time they pass over a particular point in a chart. And so you know, but then it can come back and retrograde back within a certain number of degrees. So, you know, in the Shamanic astrology paradigm, we would use a bit of a different, wider orb for Saturn and Jupiter, depending on what we're trying to calculate, what kind of a cycle we're trying to bring up. All right, so we've got those 3 set up for Chiron. And then what is our saved selections? Well, right now I just have main aspects, 1 year selected, and that is something that I saved in currently with the aspect selection. So that's what I've got going on here. And then time period. This is important for all kinds of reasons, but let's just say January 1st, 2020, and let's do a period of 4 years. You can do transits that look at months and also look at days. Now, I want to just a little bit of a warning here with this. If you have, actually, let me go back into, it looks like it brought it back up to Neptune, but I'm going to go back and make sure I got Chiron on there. If you've got one of these transit selection points, and if it also includes the moon or say Mercury or even the ascendant or one of the other angles, and you create a report with 4 years worth, it's going to be a very, very long report because the moon moves very fast. The angles change on average every 2 hours from one sign to the next. So you're going to want to make sure that you don't have the moon listed in your point selection unless you're doing like a period of months. Or if you want to just focus on a particular short-term period, then the moon is very useful, of course, when calculating different lunar phases, maybe timings that you want to do for ceremony and or events that you want to plan. The moon is absolutely vital in helping you determine that for yourself. So we've got that listed, and the location is not that when it comes to transits, it's not as important unless you're trying to determine one of the angles. These would be the ascendant, descendant, the midheaven, and home and roots. Unless you're trying to determine that for a particular place on a shorter term cycle, the natal or relocated chart is not as important. So it doesn't really matter on that for the longer planets, the bigger, wider, longer term planets. So with all that said, I'm going to go ahead and click View because this is one of the things that we're going. Oh, actually, yeah, this is the end result of this. But you want to also save selection, and this is how I came up with transits only 1 year. This is just kind of a default. You can call it anything you want. I can even at this point just call it transits only main aspects. And then I can click on that and I've saved it. But you can call it, name it after yourself, a particular thing for, conjunctions or oppositions and so forth. You can modify that in all kinds of ways. All right, then we go ahead and hit View. So the next thing that comes up is a 4-year period from January 1st, 2020 until the end of 2023. So you can see all these Chiron aspects that go all the way down to this, the last aspect when Chiron stations direct on December 26, 2023. So this is just Chiron hitting conjunctions, oppositions, and squares to aspects, to points in my chart, the radix. So one way to, like, you see all these numbers and you see the position 1, position 2. I've got age listed here as the time of whatever aspect that is, when it actually has that exact aspect. One thing that we do recognize in shamanic astrology is something called a Chiron return. This happens to everybody between about 48.5 to 51. And for me, it happens about as early as it possibly can. Even though Chiron on average every 50 years it circles the sun, and so for me it's that whole process begins in late May when it gets within 1 degree. So if I double click, I can click on the line, and then if I double click on it, it gives me the entire transit list. And at this point we've got the full list here. It enters within 1 degree on May 29, 2020. It leaves about 3 months later on August 24th, 2020. So, and then it re-enters, doesn't re-enter again till March of next year. Some might say, well, how much closer does it get? So this is what a person might, an astrologer or somebody studying astrology might say, well, how close does it actually get? Well, with solar fire, it doesn't really give you you have to kind of almost do a manual look at that, because my target degree here is 9:39, 9 degrees, 39 minutes in Aries, the sign of Aries. And then on July 11th, Chiron goes retrograde. So that's its maximum amount of movement into Aries this year in 2020. That's only 13 minutes from 9:26 to 9:39. As we know, there's 60 minutes in each degree in a particular sign, and 30 degrees in each sign, and of course 360 degrees around the wheel, around the circle. So it gets really, really close, but it doesn't quite get an exact conjunction. So since that's the case, we definitely want to include this period of time in the cycle. So for me, I get 3 exact hits here, where that X is an exact hit, E is enter, L is leaving, and you can see the whole period of time is from May 29, 2020 until March 2nd, 2022, when I'm a little over 50 years old at that point. All right, then we click OK. We understand. We can write that down. We can go in here and even look at a time map and see graphically all the different hits and enters and so forth, and even print that out if you wish. This may be more helpful for others out there. This is something I don't use. Sometimes I create my own graphic for people that are receiving readings, clients, with Excel spreadsheet or a timeline software that I use online. But you can, use whatever feels right for you. Go ahead and click that. And we can even look at a particular time when there's an exact conjunction. We can go here for me on April 11, 2021, which is the first exact conjunction between Chiron and itself on my natal chart. And we can actually view the chart of what that looks like and what else is going on there. So we can see here Chiron conjunct Chiron in this zone. In fact, a lot going on in Aries at that point. And if you just want to let that chart go, you just hit quit. It gets you back to the transit chart. If you want to export this and we say copy, and you copy to a clipboard, and you can say yes. And then what you can do is you can bring up Excel, and then you can paste it onto there. So that can be helpful if you're wanting to, modify or take out certain things and customize your report. So I'll just go ahead and click New, and blank workbook. And I don't need to recover that. I can just hit Paste, and boom, there's all the information that was in the report that I just shared with you here. So, and then you can, if you understand it, if you use Excel, this is a great tool for doing some basic organizing. Some people are more advanced in this software. I would say I'm kind of in the medium mode of this particular software. But then when we go back to Solar Fire, and we just bring that back up, and we can even print this. And this is only 3 pages here, and the last page is only 2 lines long. So you can do black and white or color. You can set up your printing. You can print it as a portrait or a landscape. So there's different ways you can do the printing. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel. I don't need to necessarily print this out. And as you can see, Chiron has, you can click on any direct or retrograde moment. You can see all the different stations, retrograde, station, direct, for the 4-year period that I've utilized in this report. So that is the report. This is, again, using the 1-degree orb that we use in Shamanic Astrology. In the Shamanic Timeline online course, we go into this in even greater detail about why we use that, and what was determined to be of most help in that way. So as you can see, when I did a view chart, it actually automatically added it to the calculated charts. Like, this is the exact time when Chiron is in conjunction with my own natal Chiron. So that's something that you can look into the future and determine that. So I want to go back into show you some other things in here in this report, just so for dynamics and so forth. Clicking on the buy wheel, then going into transits, and there are there's sign ingress. If you want to calculate that, you can do it over longer periods of time. If you want only conjunctions, or if you just wanted to calculate transits to transits, this might be helpful too. So let's look at transits to transits. That's another thing that helps us determine, like, oh, when is Mars and Venus going into conjunction? When is the Mars and the Sun going into opposition? This can help us determine what that's going to look like. So, for example, let's get out of that and go into Mars Venus. I'm going to edit this to make sure it's only Mars and Venus in the selected points. So you can see I unselected them and then selected them again. And I go ahead and save that and making sure it's in there. TRP, if I didn't mention it before, represents transit report. All right, we go ahead and hit select. I've got Mars and Venus, and we just want to look at all the various aspects between Mars and Venus, let's say over a 2-year period. And we can, there will be a lot of sign ingress moments in this. So I'm going to go ahead and click that out because it's going to have, there'll be a lot. Now, if we just wanted to look at signs, then we wouldn't need to look at the transit to transit. We can actually click that out and just look at sign ingress or stationary points. So that could be a way to do it that way too. So I'll go ahead and unclick sign ingress, click on transits to transits, and this is what's going to come up over a 2-year period. We can see from 2020, through the end of 2021, all the Mars-Venus aspects that go on. And in fact, the next time that Mars and Venus conjunct are in 2021, in July of 2021. Mars is this year in 2020 is spending a lot of time in the sign of Aries, beginning at the end of June all the way through early January of 2021. So it's creates less opportunity for a particular aspect to happen, as far as conjunction, if it already took place, let's say earlier in the year. So the last time that Mars and Venus were in conjunction was during the last summer of 2019. So this is showing you about 2 years later, they come back into aspect with each other, but obviously they're not going to be hidden in the sun during that time period. And in July, they're going to be conjunct in the sign of Leo, where the sun will be in the sign of Cancer at that time. All right, so we see all of that, and that's another way to utilize the transit report, is just to transits. If you're not wanting to look at a particular natal chart, and if you're just wanting to look at look ahead and see, oh, when is Mars going to be connecting with Venus? Or, when is perhaps Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter, which are really prominent right now in the sign of Capricorn, prominent in their, astrologically speaking, when are they, how are they coming into contact with each other this year? That can be another way to bring that in and to determine how that looks on there. So that is, these are basic settings in shamanic astrology and what we use. There's more advanced quote techniques in determining lengths of cycles for Saturn, for Jupiter, and other planets in the Shamanic Timeline online course, which is offered on shamanicastrology.com. But for creating your own and looking at this, these can be really helpful, and that's what this video was designed for. I'll go ahead, and once you're done with that report, you can quit. But and if you click on transits again, there's an interesting feature that I want to leave you with, is you can actually merge it with your last report. So we can go ahead, the current transits to transits, and we did a Chiron report last time. So let's see what that looks like. We can see that, oh, it's because I exited out. Okay, I'm going to show you how this works now. All right, I'll go ahead and click on New Report, and I'll go to Transits to Radix, and unclick Transits to Transits, and go into Chiron, select that again, and do we'll just keep it at 2 years. And I'll go ahead and just make sure merge with last report is clicked, and go ahead and hit view. And you're getting Chiron, you're getting Venus and Mars here, and you're getting the combination of both. So this can be a way to, like, if you're trying to just do something more specific, you can connect with the transits and how that's lining up perhaps with someone else's, with a person's cycle. And then you can, you know, work with that and do some interpretations around that in your own work as you understand astrology and shamanic astrology. So I'm going to head and click that, but with any report, you can export this by copying it. Yeah, it clears the last clipboard. You click yes, and then pasting it onto an Excel spreadsheet, as I showed before. So that can be really helpful if you're, you know, wanting to modify that and filter that down even more by deleting certain kinds of rows. But actually, if you click on a time map, there's a way, for example, of taking one of these lines and deleting it. And yeah, I want to delete that line. That's another way to remove certain things from an event chart, from the visual transit report. So those can be helpful. And in the Solar Fire manual, they do talk about some of these things. So you can also refer to that manual. Solar Fire is distributed by Astrolab, and the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School sells this software at the same price on shamanicastrology.com. And since Shamanic Astrology is a nonprofit, or SAMS is a nonprofit organization, a 501c3, we buy it wholesale, and the percentage of the proceeds is donated to keep the school going and functioning, its operating costs and so forth, and as an educational provider. So we would encourage you, that those that are interested in getting Solar Fire, to go to shamanicastrology.com to get that. Um, information. So it's been wonderful to share this with you, and I may do other videos along these lines around Solar Fire Gold, and maybe even Time Passages, another software that we're affiliated with, which is another great piece of software that we want to you know, share about. We have a friend, Henry Seltzer, who has created this software called Time Passages, and he works out of in the Bay Area, just south of the Bay Area, I think in Santa Cruz, in California. So that is something you can find on shamanicastrology.com. And thank you for participating in this. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to doing more with you.